Hello everyone, my name is Greg. You may recognize me from the ChemCore channel. I curate some of the chemistry courses as well as some other courses on this channel. And for a really long time, I've been really wanting to do a short video series on the MCAT. And if you're watching this video, you're probably on the way or already studying for the MCAT. And if that's you, I've made a three-part series dividing certain aspects of the MCAT that I think are important to talk about. This video, we're just going to talk about what the MCAT is, some general information about it. I think it's really important to understand what you're getting yourself into before doing it or as you're doing it. The next video, we're going to talk about the different kind of parts of studying that you might have to go through. I'm just going to talk about what I did, what I suggest, what maybe I don't suggest to do. And then the last video is going to be kind of a test day video, talking about what I experienced on my test day, what you're probably going to experience, and some of the suggestions and do's and don'ts of taking your test. And so in this video, I just want to talk about the MCAT. If you're on my channel, if you've watched any of the videos on my channel, your chances are you're either a chemistry major or a biology major, or most probably you are a pre-med. I think the wide majority of pre-meds, like 90 to 99% of pre-meds, are going to have to take the MCAT. Why do I say 90 to 99%? There are some exceptions. There are like programs that don't require the MCAT. There are some other requirements, and they're not any easier, trust me. But the wide majority of people are going to have to take the MCAT. And I think it's important to kind of, learn what the MCAT is. Now, the MCAT is the exam of getting into medical school and applying to medical school. Now, the MCAT is not an easy exam. It is a test that has 4 sections. We're going to talk about what those sections are. And if you take all the time that is given to you on the exam, it'll total about 7.5 hours. It is a very difficult exam. It's one of the most difficult graduate admissions exams in the entire world. And I've heard from some medical students and even doctors that the MCAT was harder than their admissions in medical school and further education. Now, I don't want you to think that the material is the hardest material you're ever going to learn. Eventually, when you do, and you will, get into med school and you continue on your path of becoming a doctor, you're going to learn a lot. Like, you're going to be tested a lot. It's going to be a lot of difficult information. The reason why I think a lot of higher education people who have already gone through it think that the MCAT was harder is because you're learning a lot of things that you don't really want to learn. I mean, if you're studying for the MCAT, I'm assuming you are set on becoming a doctor, and you probably don't want to learn things like physics and really like specific chemistry. I think you're probably more interested in subjects such as biochemistry and biology, and you're forced to kind of learn topics that you don't really want to learn, such as reading comprehension is also another one. And so because of that, for some people, the MCAT tends to be harder and harder to study for in general. Now, the MCAT is divided into 4 sections. The first section is the chemistry and physics section, which has 59 questions. The second section is the CARS, or critical analysis and reasoning skills section, which has 53 questions. The third section is the biology and biochemistry section, which has 59 questions. And the final section is the psychology and sociology section, which also has 59 sections. In between the chemistry and CARS section, you'll have a 10-minute break. After the CARS section and the biology biochemistry section, which ends up being right in the middle, you'll get a 30-minute break. And then the last section, kind of between biology and psych-soc, you'll get another 10 minutes. Now, the breaks, yes, you do get 10, 30, and then 10 minutes. However, it's not really like that. I'm not going to talk about it in this one. I'm kind of going to talk about it in the test day. I don't want to get you super nervous about thinking about your breaks. I think has to be the last video that you watch, maybe a week before your test. But in general, there are some kind of weird things about the breaks, and I'm going to talk about them and kind of my experience of how the breaks went. I think it's also important to know what subjects you're going to be tested on in each section. I think it's important to also kind of take the undergrad courses for each of these sections. I'm always going to recommend that. And if not, there are plenty of resources on the internet for self-studying. The first section, the chemistry and physics section, is generally going to test you on your chemistry and physics. So questions from subjects such as general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics 1 and physics 2. However, you'll also be tested on some biochemistry. You're not going to be tested on straight biochemistry topics such as, enzyme kinetics and stuff like that. That's, in a later section. What you will be tested and what I got tested on a lot are amino acids. You'll be required to kind of know what your amino acids are for both the chem phys section and the biochemistry section. And so some of the concepts that you will learn in biochemistry are going to be tested on the chem phys section, but most of them are, in the third section, the last section. Now, this section is kind of, I like to think of it as like a make or break section. It is the first section, right? And so when you're getting into your test and you're starting it, if you have a really bad chem phys section, it kind of like ruins your entire test. I always like hope that my friends and my students have a good chem phys section because it really helps you kind of get the momentum going and kind of get going. If you have a really horrible section, you're just going to be psyched out for the entire test, and it's really never good. If I had to choose one section to be bad, I would probably choose the last section, but we'll talk about that later. The second section is critical analysis and reasoning skills. I like to call it SAT on crack. It's my least favorite section. This section is basically just passage based and you'll just get questions. It's just a reading comprehension section. Most of the passages will have absolutely nothing to do with medicine and with chemistry and pre-med subjects in general. You'll get passages on history, philosophy, excerpts from other books and novels. It gets weird. The problem with cars is that a lot of people kind of going through 3-4 years of pre-med and undergrad, they kind of lose the ability to reason and analyze critically. What I would say, and I'm going to talk about this more in a later video, in the next video, this is the one section that I really suggest to take the most amount of time studying. Literal like time, not just like putting more hours in. And there's like a kind of a theory that I have regarding cars, and if you're interested in that and my tips of studying cars, I really suggest to go watch that next video. The third section is the biology and biochemistry section. In general, this tests you on biology, general biology, and biochemistry, although you will have some concepts of chemistry and some general things that you should know. Biochemistry is probably like the biggest topic to know on this exam, to be honest. The reason is because biochemistry concepts come up on both the first and third section. And so it's really important to kind of know concepts such as your amino acids and kinetics really, really, really well. I think amino acids will come up on an average of like 5 to 15 questions. Like you will get questions on the amino acids, and it's really good to really know them. And they'll appear in kind of different ways. You might not even understand that they're asking you about amino acid. You kind of have to just figure it out. Now, the last section is known as the easiest section, but it's not quite as it appears so. The last section is the psychology and sociology section, and obviously this tests you on concepts in psychology and sociology. This is a lot of memorization heavy. Now, the reason I think that people say that this is the easiest section because it in general, it is the easiest section. There's less kind of indirect and abstract concepts that you might see in chemistry and biochemistry. It's all mostly just memorization. So if you know your concepts of psychology and sociology, you will figure out the section. The problem is that it's also the last section. I think the creators did this on purpose. I don't think it's an accident that they put this as the last section on the exam. The problem is that as you go through 3 sections, as you're there for 4 to 5 to 6 hours, you're already tired. And going into the section, your brain might not be working that well. You might not be as efficient as you were in the beginning of exam. And it ends up actually being a little more difficult than expected. I have also a theory about psychology and sociology. I'm going to talk about this a little more in the next video. I think that the creators of this exam know that there's kind of a limit to how difficult they can make this section. If you know all your terms and you just straight memorize everything, you'll know everything. And so when I was taking my tests and even my practice exams, and I'll talk about which practice exams you should take and what I did, what I realized is that I would see terms that I've never, ever seen before. And through an entire undergraduate course taking psychology and taking sociology and studying this section for months, there's no possible way that I just haven't heard of a term before. And people do agree with me. This is a thing that they do. They'll just bring up a term that you've never, ever seen before. And you either have to eliminate the other choices or kind of context clue and just figure it out. I think it's completely unfair, to be honest. I don't know if it's an actual thing that they do. It's like a little theory that I have. Now, across the entire exam, except for the cars section, you'll have two types of questions: passage-based questions and questions called discrete questions. Now, passage-based questions are passage-based. You'll get a passage and you'll get, a paragraph or even sometimes an essay, charts, tables, and you'll have a question that is basically going to require you to figure something out from the passage or synthesize information based on what you've been told. Discrete questions are, I guess, standalone questions. You won't get a passage. On the left side of your screen, you're kind of going to have a blank screen, and on the right, you're just going to have just a standalone question. And usually, it's just you know it or you don't, right? It's testing you on a direct concept, and sometimes, most of the time, I find them a little easier because if you don't know it, you just don't know it. You know what I mean? It's not like you're searching through the passage for something and you're not even sure what they're asking you for. Most of the time, these questions are more straightforward. They're going to ask you about a more direct topic. Some study sources also have a question type called pseudo-discrete. I'm not exactly, I don't agree with the distinction from discrete questions. Their definition of a pseudo-discrete question is that it's a standalone question, but it does require you to grab concepts from several different sources and topics and even subjects to be able to figure out the answer. I think this is, there's no point kind of differentiating this from discrete questions. So just so you know, if you see this term come up as you're studying, it's nothing different, just maybe a little bit more broad and a little bit, a little more difficult. Now, the MCAT is graded per section. So you'll have a score for each section, as well as kind of an average and a standard deviation score, or kind of a range score. And then your scores for each section will be combined into a total score. Each section is scored from a range of 118 to 132, with 132 being the top score. And then these individual section scores are then totaled into a total score, either ranging from 472 to 528, with 528 being the top score. In general, they scale and score the exam so that 500 is the median score. And so keep that in mind as you're kind of practicing and seeing your scores. Don't be confused. Don't think that a top score means 0 mistakes. You are still able to make the mistakes, and it really does depend on the curve, right? So it's infamous that it takes a month or about 4 weeks for your score to come out after you've taken the exam. The reason is I think they kind of fix the scale and they figure things out. But as I've learned to understand, they don't make the scale based on what the general population thinks about it or how they do. They make the score based on what they think. So if they think they made a hard exam, they will scale everybody up. And if they think they made an easy exam or an easy section, they'll scale everybody down. And you can actually feel it when you take your practice exams and when you get your score for your real exam. I remember on my first test that I took, I got a pretty simple biochemistry section. I feel like I flew through it pretty easily. And then I turned out getting one of the worst scores of my life. Now, granted, you can't see what questions you got, and you can't see how many questions you got wrong. But the issue is like going through a couple months and a couple weeks of studying, I kind of knew that this biochemistry section went pretty well. And so for me to get such a low score, there has to be something with a scale. Now, conversely, I thought that the cars section on that same exam was literally horrendous. I was completely bummed. I thought I bombed it. I thought it was the worst car section of my entire life. I barely finished on time, and I never have that problem. And I turned out getting one of the best sections I've ever gotten, even compared to my practice exams. And so, it really depends. If you think that the section was difficult and you've been studying for a while, chances are a lot of other people think it's hard, and chances are they do as well. And so there's a good chance that your score will match the difficulty of the section. Now, how do you go about studying for this exam? I'm going to continue this in more depth in the next video because I want to split it up into kind of digestible sections. So go check out the next video if you want to go see that. But in general, students take an average of about 4 to 6 months to study. Now, I had a little bit less time to study for. I'm kind of in a unique position where I was required to take the MCAT for a program that I'm in. And so I only had a limited amount of time to study for it, pretty much only, a summer, so 3 months. But keeping that in mind, there are certain ideas that I can give you knowing that I had a time crunch and what I would do different that I'm going to go into more depth in the next video. So I really suggest to go check that out because I'm going to talk a lot about suggestions and popular things on the internet and do's and don'ts, things that I learned that I shouldn't have done, and things that I would tell myself if I could go back and kind of start studying again. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was kind of informational for you, and I hope you go check out my other videos. I know they're a little short, and so they won't take up much of your time. And I'll see you guys in the next video.